Hello, everyone, and welcome to our co-event with Stage 4 Solutions today. I'm Julian Guthrie. I'm the founder and CEO of Alfie, and we are all about advancing people through communication. The subject of today's session is tips for a successful job interview, and obviously communication plays a really key role in that. And we're looking at what is the communication that you use, the language that you use that is helpful to you, to your team, to the company, to what you're representing, and also potentially what is the language that could be harmful in reducing your chances of advancing. So that's what Alfie is about, but always being affirmative and always being helpful and bringing you to the next level, which is really what brought us together with Stage 4 Solutions, is creating opportunity and seeing people find the jobs, the careers, and the lives that they love. So great to meet all of you. And I'm going to hand this over to the very capable, very experienced Niti and to Selin at Stage 4. And we're going to have a great 45 minutes today.
Thank you so much, Julian. We are so happy to partner with Alfie and further your mission, and which is very aligned with Stage 4 Solutions mission. So thank you for this opportunity. So thank you all for attending our webinar this morning or afternoon, based on where you are. This is a follow-on webinar to the webinar we did in January, which was focused on job search strategies. And we thought we'd drill down to talk about how to prepare for the job interviews when you have them in your career searches. So as Julian mentioned, we have 45 minutes. We're going to present for about 20 or so minutes, and then we'll have about 20 or so minutes for your questions. So please do put your questions in the chat window, and my colleague Selin will be monitoring it. And then when we get to the Q&A, we will try to respond to as many as we can. Also, if you registered for this presentation, you will get this, the slides will be emailed to you after today's event. Okay. And also, before I dive into our thoughts, I wanted to mention that Selin and I prepared this presentation based on our over 20 years of working primarily with high-tech companies on filling roles across their marketing, IT, and other teams. And we have kept this we've kept this presentation high level on purpose. So based on what your goals are and the sorts of jobs you're interviewing for, you can pick and choose from these strategies that make sense to you and the specific job interviews you're going to be going for. So next slide, please. So we know that job interviews can be very stressful, but we believe that with a positive mindset, with research on multiple levels, practicing, and being cognizant of in-interview presence, you can be successful. And the more you research, the more you practice, the higher the likelihood of a successful outcome. And now we're going to go into some of the details around our tips and tricks on research you can do, and the practice and day of interview tips and the interview follow-up. So next slide, please. So there's different levels of research that we recommend to job seekers. So some of it is just general interview skills, and then we'll talk later about industry level research and company level research. But in terms of general research, there's a lot of online tools, and obviously AI, ChatGPT is a great tool for a lot of these. But we think that you can get yourself in the correct mindset if you look at some of these tools and get that general information. So there are interview preparation websites that you can use, like Glassdoor or InterviewBit for more technical roles, where you can look at like interview questions that maybe were asked of prior interviewers, prior candidates talking about the interview process, etc. You can look at online forums and courses like LinkedIn groups or Stack Overflow that can, again, give you that firsthand experience from past interviewers. And platforms like Coursera and LinkedIn Learning and others offer courses and tutorials on interview preparation specifically. So these are general things you can look at. You can also have some online mock interview platforms. You can look at some of those. And then ChatGPT, obviously, everyone's talking about it, and other AI tools, but you can use that to look at, what are the normal interview questions asked for this sort of role or that sort of role. And then we also think it's really important to be comfortable with online video tools that are so typical for interviews. So like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc. So you can set up a free account. You can take time to learn so you're comfortable in a format that is, again, pretty normal. And we also think you can use some of these tools in practice with family and friends or ex-colleagues. So again, just get really comfortable with general interview skills. Next slide, please. So then in terms of diving into specific research areas, if you're interviewing, say, in a certain industry, and all the jobs and the companies you're interviewing for are in a certain industry, it's really great to research that industry and understand the current trends and news that's happening. And if you're working in the same industry, it's easy to think you kind of know what's going on, but it's still important to do this research so you are kind of up to date of what's going on. So simple things you can do is you can read industry specific publications or blogs or news websites. You can look at articles and reports around like the role category that you're looking for, and then really try to think about what some of the challenges and market trends are that affect that role. Also, to understand the market landscape, understand like who the competitors are in the market, and understand how like the different companies are placed. Sometimes Gartner reports are really great to get market landscape information. And this is, or other industry analyst reports. And we believe the more that you understand the industry and up to date on it, you can present yourself better to any of the companies in the industry that you will be interviewing with. Next slide, please. And then to get more specific, when you have a job interview scheduled with a specific company for a specific role, our recommendation is that you budget at least 2 hours of interview prep for each interview that you have. Now, I know this sounds like a lot, especially if you're interviewing broadly, but we believe that the more research and practice you do for each interview, the more likely the successful outcome. So in terms of the specific company, when you have a company, when you have an interview at a specific company, these are some general guidelines or suggestions we have. So you want to obviously understand the company, what are their solutions and products? What are they doing? How are they different than competitors in their industry, and even knowing who their competitors are? And all of this is public information, so you can find it all online. And here's, obviously the company website is great, but then you can also go beyond that. You can use Google to see what the news is about the company. And you can also look at the company's social media accounts to see what they're saying and putting out there, and then read the company blogs. And it's also important to understand how the company is doing financially. If the company you're interviewing for is a public company, they have to, by SEC rules, disclose all their financial information. So you can read financial filings like the 10Ks or the 10Qs, not only for their financial results, but in those documents, they always have a section on the management discussion. And you can get a sense of what the management is at least, highlighting for the public world. If you're interviewing at a private company, there are less, financial information out there on the company, but you can use sites like Owler and Crunchbase to understand, maybe who their investors are, how much money they've raised, how big they are, estimated revenues, just to, again, get a better sense of the company. And obviously, this isn't on the slide, but if you know people at the company, definitely talk to those friends and get that inside view of what's going on and what is most important inside the company right now. Next slide. And then in terms of research, after you've done kind of the industry level research, the company level research, it's really important to really understand the role that you are interviewing for. And that starts with the job description. And we know, especially being a staffing firm, we know that job descriptions are not always perfect, but it is the information you have. So it's very important to read the job description and understand it. And for each job responsibility listed on the job description, we suggest that you come up with an example and know, when you've done that responsibility in a prior job. And this is going to be on a later slide, but we suggest writing out your answer to, hey, when have you done this before? Because we believe writing out your answer will help crystallize it in your mind. Not that you're going to read it from what you've written out, but it just helps you practice. Also look at each requirement on the job description and know when you have met that requirement in your past jobs, like whether it's systems that you've used or skills that you've used. So have that listed out too. And then you can find people at the company that have the same or similar job title and understand their backgrounds and kind of understand how your background is similar to that person's. This works really well when it's a big company and there's lots of people in the same role. If you're interviewing for a unique role or a very small company, this might be a little bit harder to do. You also want to research the interviewers with whom you'll be meeting. So obviously Google them, see what what the public information is about them, but also look at their LinkedIn profiles, understand their backgrounds, maybe what industries they've come from, but also see like where, maybe if you have mutual connections or maybe where your background aligns with their background. Maybe you both worked at a certain company or went to the same college, etc. And then also try to understand the interviewer, what their connection is to the role that you are interviewing for. So you can kind of guess what their perspective would be and then kind of adjust what you're saying to them based on that understanding. And you can always ask them that too, but if you can figure it out in advance, it's better. Next slide. Thank you. And then this is for before each interview, you definitely want to brainstorm the questions you imagine the interviewers will be asking. And if you're interviewing for a job that you've had in the past, or maybe you've even hired people in similar roles, you yourself know, in the past I was asked these sorts of questions. But you can always ask ChatGPT that it can help you with what are common questions that interviewers will ask for this role. And so for each of the common interview questions, you want to write your answers. And again, you won't be reading your answers in the interview, but the practice of writing them down will help crystallize the answers in your mind. You also want to understand maybe where your weaknesses are for the role, maybe things that you're lacking, and have answers on how you're going to address it, or even show how you've already started learning to address that weakness. In your answers in interviews, we suggest that you structure your answers with a high-level intro, the main points, and then a focus on the results you achieved. Again, this really depends on what the question is, but you really want to focus on the results you achieved in past roles as opposed to just activities that you did. And we think it's really important to be concise in the answers, but then ask the interviewer if they'd like more details, and then you can get into more details, but it's important not to be long-winded. And if in any of the questions you can tailor it to the specific company, that is great to say, when I was working at a company in your industry, this is how I address this issue. that makes it even better, because then you're building more alignment with the company and connection with the interviewer. And then we believe it's really important to do mock interviews. So to ask, friends or family or past colleagues, etc., to do a mock interview with you for a specific role that they're qualified to do a mock interview for is very, very helpful. And even if it's someone who doesn't know your specific background or the specific role that you're interviewing for, just the practice of saying your answers out loud really, really helps you perform better in the interview. Next slide, please. And then it's another place to practice is to prepare questions for each interviewer. So in just about all interviews, the interviewer will give you time to ask them questions. And every now and then, and this happens with when our candidates are interviewing with our clients, a candidate doesn't have any questions for the interviewer. And that is almost always a red flag, because that shows, that indicates to the interviewer often that either the candidate is not really interested in the role or they haven't done any homework. So you definitely want to have 2 or 3 questions prepared for each interviewer. And the questions that you prepare, really, you want to make them specific to the role and showcase your understanding of the role and the homework you did on the company. So you don't want to have a general question like, oh, tell me about the culture at the company. But you want to have a more specific question that says, I did research on your industry. I see your competitors are doing X. I'm curious how you're responding to this and how this role could help drive that initiative, and you get it really specific to the role. And then you want to engage with the interviewer. So pay attention to their questions and you can ask follow-on questions to the questions they're asking you. Okay. Next slide, please. And then we're going to shift gears to say, when you're preparing for the specific interview, you want to be prepared for all different types of interviews. So it might be a phone interview that turns into a video interview, or it might be a video interview that turns into a phone interview. But if you have a phone or a video interview, you want to make sure you're in a quiet place where you can hear and be heard, and ensure, that your internet cell connectivity is strong. Sometimes I'll interview our candidates and they're, take an interview when they're driving in a car. That is not a good idea. Or they're at a coffee shop and it's really noisy. Because interviews are always scheduled in advance, you can control where you are and, what your internet or cell connectivity is. If you are doing an online interview, always click on the link at least 5 minutes beforehand. So if there's any issues, you have some time to resolve it. If you have an in-person interview, definitely arrive early and account for traffic and time to park and sign in. Again, being late for an interview is just something you can control and avoid. And then we think it's really important to dress appropriately for interviews. And sometimes it's hard to know what the dress code is at a workplace, but we think if you're not sure, business casual is a pretty safe choice. And even if it's a video interview, we suggest that you dress professionally, because that presence and that professionalism still comes through. Next slide, please. And here's a list of do's and don'ts for the actual day of the interview or the interview time. So we suggest that you always be honest, but present your past in the best perspective. It's kind of the best version of yourselves and the truth of your background, but never to misrepresent, because we believe that always catches up with you. We think it's important to have a copy of your resume in front of you, whether it's a video interview or phone call or in person, because if the interviewer asks you, oh, in this job, what did you do? And they point to a specific bullet point on your resume, you don't want to be like, oh, I don't remember. You want to have it in front of you and you can respond. So pretty basic, but it does really matter. And then this is to the point of the professionalism from the prior slide, but remember to also focus on your body language and be as professional as you can be. And always be positive in the interview. Never, ever be negative about past experiences. We all know that, every company has their pros and cons, but you never want to badmouth a prior company or boss. It just really raises a red flag for almost all interviewers. And you want to give the interviewer time to lead the interview and ask their questions, but you also want to make sure you have, you balance that out with presenting yourself and making sure you respond to their questions appropriately. And if you are, we also suggest that you not mention, other companies or other jobs you're interviewing for. And of course, you should be interviewing broadly. Everyone knows you should, but you don't want to mention it proactively because sometimes interviewers interpret that as, oh, they're not that interested in my job. Now, if asked, hey, are you interviewing elsewhere? The answer is, of course, I'm interviewing elsewhere, but this job in this company is my priority. To always say that, this is a job that you're very, very interested in. And then you want to be curious about the interviewer's job and how you can add value to them and point to examples of when you've worked with their type of role in the past. It's about building that connection with the interviewer. Okay, next slide, please. And then after the interview, we suggest that you send a thank you note to each interviewer within 1 or 2 days. That really shows that you're proactive, that you're excited about the role. And in the thank you email, we suggest that you make it specific to the conversation that you had. So sometimes I see thank you notes that are like, oh, thank you for spending time for me, really interested in the role, can't wait for next steps. That's not a bad thank you note, but the more specific you can make it, it would be better. So to really point to something perhaps you talked about in the conversation, or a challenge with the company, or your thoughts about how you would start the role. All of those more specific things would help. And if the interviewer asked you for any, portfolio links or examples, etc., definitely include that in your thank you. Next slide, please. So that is the conclusion of our prepared remarks and suggestions on how best to prepare for an interview. I don't know if we have any questions, but we do have about almost 20 minutes to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Okay. So Niti, we have some questions. Also, there is a little bit of a delay between our streaming service and LinkedIn Live. So everyone who's viewing this event on LinkedIn, they're actually seeing it with a little bit of a delay, like a minute delay, I would say. And actually it started over and over again for some people, but I can see it well, and I did ask it in the questions. So hopefully everyone is able to see it well. And here, Niti, just to reiterate, we will be sharing the recording and the presentation after the session. So the first question we have is, any tips on anxiety during the interview? Actually, 3 of the attendees asked about it.
Yeah, so, well, thank you for that question. And so there's lots, everyone's different on how to handle the anxiety or the stress. So I think I break it into, well, what can you do beforehand to address it? And what can you do like in the moment, right? So, and everyone's different, but for me, doing my homework and practicing and practicing and practicing makes me less anxious. So that is one way I personally handle a situation that I think is hard and I want a certain outcome and I'm worried about it, is really practicing more. And I think interviews most of us are not professional interviewers, right? So interviewing is a specific skill, and it's a specific muscle that we don't really exercise very often. So the more you practice, the better you're going to be. I can guarantee that. That's number one. And then in terms of stress, I think for me, like if I go to the gym and I go to a really fun Zumba class or yoga class, that really just helps me relax. So that's something I personally do just to bring down my stress level. And lastly, in the interview, and I know this sounds really simplistic, but I will just shut my eyes, like before a big meeting, shut my eyes and take several deep breaths and slowly breathe in and out. And that really does help calm me and center me. So those are my strategies, but I think that's really important, but to reflect internally and say, okay, how do I handle stress and how can I, calm myself for an interview, I think is important to think through.
Thank you, Niti. So the next question is, how would you recommend on recognizing where to improve for an interview besides mock interviews? I think it's rare to have any specific feedback from the interviewers.
So absolutely good question. And I will say it is true that most company interviewers will not give you feedback. Sometimes it's because they don't have time. Sometimes there's legal liabilities involved. So you're right. You typically do not get feedback. So in terms of knowing how to improve, so there are online platforms for mock interviews. So definitely check those out. Also, I think to ask family and friends to say, hey, here's the list of questions, just ask me. And then you tell me, how I sound, even if they don't know the specific role that you're interviewing for. I think you can get really good feedback. I think you can record yourself, like just with your cell phone and say, hey, how do I look when I answer these questions? Am I fumbling? Do I sound too long-winded? So you can practice with yourself. And then I will say, again, asking past colleagues like, hey, I'm interviewing for these sorts of jobs. Could you just spend 15 minutes, give me your feedback? I think most people will help you out for 15 minutes. So those are my suggestions on how to interview. So with friends, with colleagues, and frankly, even with yourself.
Okay, thank you, Niti. So the next question is, how early to arrive to a Zoom interview? One recruiter told me 10 minutes, another said 3 minutes. What's the sweet spot?
So, I mean, we have 5 minutes. I think the point but 10 minutes is fine too. The point is, in case I would say, 5 to 10 minutes is good because you want to give yourself enough time. Like say you click on the link and it's a broken link, because that does happen, right? Like it's not a real link or it's not scheduled. You want to give yourself enough time to be able to interview maybe the recruiter you're working with, or if you have the interviewer's email, you want to have enough time to email them, figure out a backup, or call them, get a backup. So I think 5 to 10 minutes is good. And most people either have a waiting room set up in their Zoom link or the meeting's not yet started. So you won't, every now and then you might interrupt another meeting, but that's okay because the host has set up their Zoom link or their Teams that way. So 5 to 10 minutes. But it's basically to give yourself enough time to recover if the link is not working for you.
So we're actually getting a lot of questions. So just a minute, please.
I can't see them on my view, so I just am waiting.
I will just read it just a second, please. Okay, so is it all right to ask at least 5 questions during the interview?
So I think it depends on the interview. So I'm so sorry, it's a general answer, but I think you should wait and ask. Well, so let me back up. So the best interviewers are really conversations, right? So if it's an engaging conversation, the interviewer is asking you questions, you're asking them. That is kind of the best interview, right? Where it's really a conversation. But every interviewer is different. So I think having 5 questions prepared is actually really good. But you want to weave them in where appropriate. So if the interviewer has a style that is like they're asking the questions and they want answers from you, I would wait for to ask your questions until the interviewer says, do you have any questions for me? But if it really is more of a conversational approach, then I would weave them into the conversation. But I think having anywhere from 3 to 5 questions prepared for each interviewer is a really good idea.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, what is one question that always stands out to you asked by the interviewee?
Yeah, so I don't think there's one question. I think, again, I think it's the more specific questions that I appreciate because it shows the candidate's knowledge of the role, the homework they've done on the company and the role. I think the questions I don't like as an interviewer, for our client roles is the real general ones that show no homework or no like thought, like, tell me about the culture, especially if it's a company that's public and you can go to Glassdoor and read about their, or any company, you can go to Glassdoor and read about their culture. Or, tell me the 30, 60, 90-day plan for this role. These just very general questions, I think, to me, feel like a little bit of a waste of time. But when people are thoughtful or they ask about, in past roles, I've seen this sort of.
Niti, actually, I lost.
Am I back, Selin? I'm so sorry. Okay, can you hear me?
Okay. I think we are back. We had a connection problem. Niti, can you hear me? Oh, thank you. Niti, can you hear us?
I'm sorry. Is this better? Selin, can you hear me? I'm sorry, Selin.
Okay, so everyone can hear me and see me. Niti, can you hear me too?
Yes, Selin, I can hear you.
I think maybe it was my connection. I'm not sure what's going on, but apologies about that. I will read the question. What's the best way to react to the wanted salary? Usually they ask it during the first interview, and I'm usually afraid to handle it the wrong way.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, so first of all, and I think everyone knows this, but companies are no longer allowed to ask for salary history. So if you get a question saying, hey, what did you make in your last job? That is an illegal question. They cannot ask you that. But they can ask you, what are your salary expectations? And I believe the best way to answer that is to keep it open-ended. So the person who asked this question, yeah, you don't want to I'm sorry, one more general point. So now in California and in most states in America, job descriptions, any sort of public job description needs to have the pay compensation on the job description. Again, many states have this rule and most employers have adopted this nationwide. So you can look at the job description and at the bottom, they should publish the salary range for the job. So look at that. And then if they don't have it, I think, well, if they do have it, to say, I've looked at the salary range on the job description, that range is great for me. But what I'm most interested is the overall experience. Like, I want a team where I feel comfortable. I want an environment where I'm adding value, but I'm also being challenged to learn new things. So keep it general. If there is no salary range in the job description, because not every state requires it yet, then to say, again, I'm sure that the range that you have is market competitive, and I'm really interested in the overall opportunity. And then you can ask them, what is, I'm pretty flexible. What is the range you have for the role? So that's how I would answer it. I would not give a specific number up front.
So one person asked why we should hire you for this role. I think the question is probably how to respond to such question.
Yeah, so that's a great question to respond to. I don't hear it a lot from interviewers, but people could ask it. And then to point to why, maybe the top 4 things you have in your background that align with their needs. Talk about, your ability to learn and your excitement for the role. And then, point to the fact that you're willing to work hard and fill any gaps that you have in your background that you might not have on day one. And I'm sorry, I'm not answering that question super specifically because it really depends on the role. But like for the marketing roles, we typically work on a lot. We fill a bunch of other roles. You can really point to, well, I believe I'm a very well qualified candidate because I have the specific skills you're looking for. I've addressed these same issues in my last role, and I'm really excited about where the company is and the growth potential of the company. And I feel like I can add value because of these, skills or personality type that I have.
So the next question is how to know if the offered salary is the right amount?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, well, I think this is where, so there's a lot of online tools like salary.com. You can look at salary ranges, but they tend to be really very wide. Or ask friends, maybe in the same company, like what are the ranges you're seeing for this sort of role? But at the end of the day, I think that's a really personal decision to say what's enough, because for many people, you want to look at the overall package, like what's the work you're going to be doing? Is there a commute? Is there travel? How's the company doing? What is the prospects of progression, or where that job could lead, how it aligns to your career goals. So I don't know if there's a right number for a salary, but you can do research and talk to people. And then again, it's really very personal about what's that overall picture look like.
How do you balance interviewing for more than one position at the same company and still sound genuine?
Yeah, that's really tricky. I think it really depends on what the roles are, right? Like if they're, especially in a large company, there might be multiple teams with similar roles. And then I think you just, again, handle each one specifically to say, hey, I'm really interested in X, and I can do that in different roles. I think that's okay. I think it becomes pretty tricky if you're interviewing for vastly different roles. But chances are you're probably not interviewing for roles that are really, really different because then they probably wouldn't align with your background. I think if you're a new college grad, that can happen more often. But then I think you handle those level of interviews a little differently. So that's a little bit of a hard question to answer without specifics onto like what the different roles are.
Okay, another question we have is, what are the basic steps to follow in an interview?
And again, maybe that person could put in a more specific question.
Yeah, because it depends on the interview. Yeah, so I will just move on to the next one.
Yeah.
What happens after the interview if I am told to wait for feedback after 3 weeks?
Well, I mean, I think it's okay to follow up with your point of contact. So if it's a recruiter in the company or an external recruiter, to say, okay, let me follow up after that time. I think that's really all you can do. Well, let me back up. So with one of my mentees, similar situation. So anyone attended the January seminar, we talked about my mentee and their process. But if you're told to wait, honestly, you have to wait. And if they say 3 weeks, that's a long time, but I would put it on my calendar, follow up in 3 weeks. But in the interim, what you can do, and very few people do this, but you can say, depending on the role or the company, if you're attending like a free event or you read some interesting article that the hiring manager might be interested in, et cetera, you could send them an email. And I wouldn't send an email saying, hey, I'm still waiting for the interview feedback. Please let me know. But it is great to say, hey, interviewer, I just attended this great event that's in your industry, and I attended this presentation by X. Here's the link to the YouTube video. I thought you might get value of it, and you summarize it. It just, again, furthers that you're really interested in the company and you're actually engaged in the role, right? So that's an easy way to follow up if you're really interested in a role and you're not getting any feedback. And that also is great because the interviewer is like, wow, this person is really proactive. They're out there investing in themselves in ways that's going to help my team.
Okay. So we have one more question. I was in sales and lost my job, got fired for not hitting my numbers. How do you handle that in an interview?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So I would, so it depends on your past situation. So, sorry, my elbow muted me. But I would answer that it depends on your situation. So if you were doing everything right, but say you were at a company that you were selling a product that just didn't work, and that does happen, you can say, you know, I created a sales plan that was approved. I executed on it, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, the sales didn't happen because the proof of concepts didn't work, and that was unfortunately something I, as a sales rep, couldn't control. So that's like an approach to say, hey, you know, this was my responsibility. I achieved that, but there was some external factor. That's one approach. Or if there was prior jobs where you did hit quota, to bring that up. Yeah, I think those are probably the only top of mind ideas I have for that specific questions.
Well, we almost answered all of them. We have 2 more questions, but we also have to end the session within just a couple minutes. So I will read this one. I have been told to ask, do you have any concerns about my experience at the end of an interview? I don't really care for this question, but should I ask it?
Yeah, I agree with you. I also do not like that question because to me, it's just, again, really broad and general. And I'm like, even when I interview candidates for our clients' roles, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to say. And if I have concerns, I'm probably not going to bring them up because, like, what do you expect? So no, I agree with you. I don't think that is a great question. I think it is fair to say, hey, I'm really excited about the role. What are the next steps? I think that is a fair question. But yeah, to say, you know, do you have any concerns about background? I don't like that question. So I agree with you.
So also, a few people are asking, appreciate the presentation. Is there a way to send additional questions for feedback, email, or LinkedIn messaging?
Yeah.
So we it over email, and we have your contact information at the end.
Yeah, so if you go to Carolyn, if you could go to the last slide. Yeah, so here is my contact information and our company's website. So if you do have questions, please just email me. I'll be honest, I will try to respond. Depending on how many questions we have, I will try to respond to all of them. But if I get a lot, sometimes it just takes me a few days just because I'm busy. But you can definitely email me. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect. And if you are looking for jobs and you're interested in, we primarily work on contract and contract to perm roles. You can go to our careers website and upload your resume there, and then or apply to jobs if there's something open that you're interested in currently. But otherwise, you can just upload your resume, and that way you can get emails from our recruiting team whenever there's openings that you might be interested in. But we really appreciate this time, and I hope everyone got some value out of it, and I hope it helps you in your interviews and in your overall career search. Really happy that you took the time with us today. And I think we will be closing the session in about 30 seconds. Is that correct, Selin?
Yes, I think so. And I know we have a few more questions, and I will share them with Niti after this event. And we will follow up with an email. And this, the recording will be on our YouTube channel. Also, you can view it on this event page too, so it stays on this event page. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for your time.